Martha Crean, and I'm on the board of the deVeber Institute for Bioethics and Social Research. So I welcome everybody here this evening. I'm glad you found the coop, which you could also think of as either a chicken coop, or as a cooperative. And so we're all here cooperatively to listen to a wonderful talk tonight. So I welcome all of you. And I would like to introduce the person after whom the Institute is named, and that is Dr. Barry deVeber, pronounced deVeber. And Dr. Barry deVeber, who lives in London, Ontario, is the founding president of the Institute, which has been an institute now for 30 years. And we are very, very pleased to be able to have Barry here tonight to welcome Dr. Margaret Somerville, whom we've all come to hear tonight. So, Dr. Barry deVeber, please.
Well, 30 years, that makes me pretty old. But anyway, this is terrific. Oh boy, what a crowd. And it's no surprise, Margaret Somerville is so well known and so widely published that I'm not really surprised people come up to hear. She's, I'd say, probably the top bioethicist in Canada today. And she's published in the Globe and Mail and all over the place. So, as well as welcoming her especially, I welcome all of you here on behalf of the Institute. We've grown from a very small group of people into quite a large institution. We've been getting summer students funded by the government. We've been publishing books. We're working on our 3rd edition. So there's a lot of activity going on, and I'm very proud of the people following me. I am the co-president, but I must say that Martha works a lot harder than I do. So I'm sort of a silent co-president. So I'm just delighted you're here, and delighted to meet some of you, and I'll meet people afterwards. We're not going anywhere tonight, except for my brother, please. And I guess now we'll have Paul introduce Margaret. Where's Paul?
Dr. Paul Rinaldi.
Former member of our board, very great eye neurologist who knows a lot about fetal pain and other stuff.
Well, it's the man who made this all possible initially, and I just want to say that friends and members of the deVeber and ladies and gentlemen of the public, we're of course deeply honored that Margaret Somerville will speak to us tonight, in my opinion, Canada's foremost ethicist. I want to personally thank those who put this all together, Kathy, Lorraine, Martha, and Patricia especially. Kathy's pleaded with me to remind you, especially those who are from the public, that the deVeber Institute is non-profit, but we greatly value donations to further our work. Our work is really asking questions about life and about humankind that others tend not to ask. And we try and do original research, and we stand by the research. Kathy also said they're going to be passing around a basket. If anyone hasn't had any chance to donate, I think it's going to be seeded with a few loonies, and we're hoping it will be like the parable of the loaves and the fishes. We know how that one turned out. Dr. Somerville is a gift from down under. She's born in Australia, and something I didn't know was that she's trained and actually practices as a pharmacist, which I think would give her some extra insight into some of the pharmacological measures dealing with the end of life. But then she went back and trained as a lawyer, achieved her law degree, and practiced in Australia before coming and being appointed to McGill University. She has had many honors and has moved up the chain and is now a professor, Samuel Gale Professor of Law at McGill University. But that's just the start of it, teaching our young people. She speaks publicly in forums such as this on many different life issues, including euthanasia, the reproductive technologies conundrum, mental health, human rights and healthcare, the pharmaceutical industry, AIDS, abortion, medical research and technology, etc. She is the recipient of many honorary degrees and has written widely. She once received a tremendous honor of being asked to deliver the Massey Lectures on CBC Radio in 2006, and these were 5 lectures that were put into book form called The Ethical Imagination. Journeys of the Human Spirit. So those of us who have read and admired Dr. Somerville for some time, I think we've enjoyed a few qualities. First of all, her rigorous intellectual base, her drive to explore public ideas, her passion to enlighten, and I think tonight is going to be one example of that, and of course the erudition of her message. But she's probably heard all this before. I would like to take just a couple of moments, if I may, to speak briefly to something else. Her courage under fire. There is something about the directness and honesty of Dr. Somerville when she speaks about life issues that riles many of her philosophical opponents. Personally, I think this is in part due to the fact that she's out there. By out there, I mean she's out there in the public fora. She speaks to the major media. She's invited to speak on CBC. She's invited to give op-ed editorials to the Globe and Mail. I think it's well recognized as a generally mild to moderately socially liberal bent in the mainstream media in Canada. And they carry along their audiences, and they are exposed to some of the challenging ideas of Dr. Somerville. Now, I must say also, this is so valuable that someone who values life in all its forms and all its stages has the intellectual rigor, she has the chops to get invited to the major media. It's so important. She doesn't shelter herself in the fair domains and preach to the choir. I think this evening hopefully is a rare break from that, Dr. Somerville, although we do welcome respectful comment later from all sides of this important debate. Now, Dr. Somerville does enormous good by venturing out into the wider public square, which can be something of a free fire zone. Dr. Somerville has taken many arrows for the causes that she pursues. I think sometimes it must feel like you're an acupuncture patient. Our former Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau, I think the original influential social liberal among us, once described Canada as a peaceable kingdom. And I think by and large he got it right. But I have noted that many, not all, a number of so-called progressives, now there's a self-congratulatory term if ever you heard one, but they are only peaceable if they get their way. I have some experience with my children in this regard. It is often said that you can know someone by their friends, but I think the converse can also be true. You can draw a portrait of a person as the antithesis of their opponents, or at least some of them. In several fora lately, mostly on the internet, some of our valuable ones are, well, you'd be struck by the venom of some of their opposition. And I've noticed that a lot of those comments they're shallow, they're ill-informed, they can be rude. And again, this is a small, expressive amount. We probably wouldn't hear from them if it wasn't for the internet, but they're out there. But one can paint a reverse image of Dr. Somerville. She is rigorously grounded, she's intellectually secure, she's respectful, she's classy. Does she lead with her chin? Well, I think Dr. Somerville has a bit of former President Harry Truman in her. You know, give him hell, Harry? There was an interview after he retired when someone asked him about the moniker, give him hell, Harry. And he actually said, I never gave him hell. I gave him the truth. And they thought it was hell. Well, Dr. Somerville, I fear the message you have for us tonight may actually be a difficult one for us to hear. But our good fortune to have you come and speak to us is, well, heaven sent. Please join me, friends, in welcoming Dr. Margaret Somerville.
Thank you, Dr. Rinaldi, Dr. deVeber, and everyone else. I'm really thrilled that you're all here, and I'm very surprised. I thought this was going to be a small event, but it's really great. And I'm pleased to have the opportunity to talk to you about euthanasia and assisted suicide, usually in the context of physician-assisted suicide. One of my newspaper editors asked me a while ago what did I think would be the defining event of the first 10 to 20 years of the 21st century. And my answer was that I think it will be what we decide about euthanasia in Canada. And I'm really concerned that we're going to decide, or that the majority will decide, that it should be legalized. and I think that's a huge mistake, and that's why I want to put the case to you tonight about why I think it's a huge mistake. So, just a few introductory remarks, because mainly I'm going to talk to you about the Carter case, which is the recent physician-assisted suicide case from British Columbia. Before I get into that, I think we have to place euthanasia, and I use that term to include physician-assisted suicide, in a larger context. And what the debate does is it focuses attention on the importance to humanity of putting into practice the belief that all human life has dignity and deserves respect and protection. Because if you legalize euthanasia, you have to think that there are some lives that don't deserve that respect and protection, and the main reason that people who are in favor of euthanasia will give you is that they're using euthanasia because the person has lost their dignity, and you can't restore that, but you can put them out of their undignified state. And I think we also have to be aware that this is not an isolated issue, that there's many current attitudes and values that could affect how terminally ill, dying, and vulnerable people are treated. So I just give one example here. I've actually written a whole paper with all of the values that I think will have impact on the euthanasia debate, and they include things like the lack of adherence to organized religion, the huge free-floating anxiety and fear of death that we've got in our secular societies, all sorts of things. But one of the factors, and I think this is an interesting one, is materialism and consumerism as priority values. And I was debating in Australia the premier of one of Australia's states, and he was very supportive of legalising euthanasia. Australia's having the same debates that we are, as indeed is England and of course a lot of the states in the US. And what he said was that he was a big, tall man, sort of rather brusque in the way he dealt with people, just like, you know, a true politician. It was as though it was question period in the House of Commons. And he said, look, he said, when you're past your best buy or use before date, you should be checked out as quickly, cheaply, and efficiently as possible. And of course, that's exactly what euthanasia does. It checks you out. But what I argued is that we humans are not products, and certainly life is not a supermarket that we should get checked out of. I think the other thing that we have to think about in the wider context in this debate is the cumulative effect of how we treat vulnerable people in general, and the impact of that on the shared values, what we sometimes call the glue that bonds us together as a society, and how that sets what we call in ethics the ethical tone of the society. Usually when we're dealing with difficult issues where we disagree, whether you take euthanasia or abortion or quite a few others, people will say, well, it's just the individual's decision, and each individual has the right to make that decision for themselves. That's very prominent in the euthanasia debate. But you can't just do that. You have to look as well, what is the cumulative effect of all of those individual decisions? And one of the interesting areas that's coming up in that regard here in Canada is, for example, sex selection abortion. It's not just that one person said, I don't want a girl, and aborted that girl. What you now have in Asia and China and India is that there's possibly around 600 million girls that have been aborted. And in some areas of China, they've got 160 boys for every 100 girls. So these boys these young men can't find any women to marry. And that has enormous social impact. The same thing here in North America. 85% of unborn children with Down syndrome are now aborted. So we're going to have the wiping out of whole groups of people. And what is happening with our new genetics is that is enabling us to identify more and more and more groups of people where people could make individual decisions to wipe out those people. So this is all, we have to take that into account. And there's a statement there that I think is very important, that you can't judge the ethical tone of a society by how it treats its strongest, most privileged, most powerful members. They'll always be okay. But you judge it by how it treats its weakest, most vulnerable and most in need. And I'd suggest to you that dying people belong to that latter group. So how we treat dying people, that will tell us what is the ethical tone of our society.